Welcome to Beyond Business Barriers, powered by insights, driven by strategy, and yes, assisted by AI. I'm your host, Roy MacEwen, and today's episode is part of a special series where we sit down with industry leaders to dig into what's working, what's not, and what the future holds. I'm thrilled to welcome Jeff to the show today. Jeff, it's great to have you here. Let's begin with a brief introduction, and can you tell us a bit about yourself and where our listeners can connect with you online?
Thanks for having me, Roy. My name is Jeff Krimmel. The easiest way to find me probably is on LinkedIn. My last name is Krimmel. And my background in terms of education is all in mechanical engineering. I have a bachelor's, a master's, a PhD, all in mechanical engineering. My bachelor's was at the University of Texas at Austin. My master's and PhD were at Caltech. And when I was at Caltech, my PhD research program was a biomedical focused research project. So I figured I was going to have this long and fruitful research and development career in biomedical, and that's not how it ended up happening. I defended my thesis in March of 2010, which means I was looking for work in the fall of 2009. And if you go back and trace U.S. unemployment over time, you see it peaking in the fall of 2009. So I sent out a whole bunch of resumes, and I got two interviews that turned into two job offers. One was with a defense contractor in San Diego, and one was with Baker Hughes in the oilfield service space in Houston. And I was born and raised in Houston, and I had very little idea if I really wanted to belong to the oil and gas industry. But I figured it was a chance to take me back home. Even if I didn't like the job, I'd be around friends and family. I could reset and figure out what next steps were. The long story short version is I really enjoyed my time at Baker Hughes. I spent 8 years there. I started out in research and development, but very quickly found my way into some data-driven pricing and profitability work. That took me into some strategic market intelligence work. I left Baker Hughes in 2018 to join another oilfield services company called Key Energy Services. I spent a couple of years there doing mostly pricing work, but there was a little bit of profitability, a little bit of market research. My next stop was over at a company called Pinnacle, which is a mid-market industrial reliability solutions company. They mostly work with petroleum refiners to pull their data and help the refiners build optimized inspection and maintenance plans. And I eventually became the chief strategy officer at Pinnacle. And I decided to resign that role in January of 2024 so I could launch my own energy strategy consulting firm that I call Krimmel Strategy Group, KSG. And that's what I've been doing since January of 2024, working with mostly executive clients across the energy space, oil and gas dominantly, because that's where my background is. But I've also done work in power and renewables and chemicals and pulp and paper. So a pretty wide range of projects there, all focused on strategy.
Well, that's a very impressive resume. I appreciate you sharing that, Jeff. So for what we're going to do now, our listeners can expect today, we'll start with your professional journey in your business right now. You kind of went on that. We'll elaborate on that a little bit more, on some industry changes you're observing, and then we'll move into your current challenges, priorities, and finally, we'll look ahead to your long-term goals and how you're planning for what's coming up next. Does that sound like a plan, Jeff?
It sounds wonderful.
All right. Well, to start, can you describe your role at your company and how it supports the broader mission you're working towards?
Yes, that one's pretty easy for me since I'm the owner of Krimmel Strategy Group. And to this point, I'm still nominally a one-man band. I do bring people in to support from time to time on project work, but I'm the only full-time employee here. And frankly, that was part of the reason that I felt like I wanted to explore and experiment around my own consulting firm. This question that you asked is incredibly important. It is something that I have paid a lot of attention to in my career in terms of what role am I playing in this company right now, knowing how the company itself is bringing value to its customers. How am I then enabling the customer or enabling our own company to bring that value to the customer? And so it's a question that I've pondered a lot, and I appreciated the clarity of being able to launch my own firm. And what this has done for me is allowed me to put what I find to be an interesting twist on the question you just asked, which is now, rather than being a little more introspective and thinking, okay, what value am I bringing to KSG? I immediately step into the KSG side of things and think, okay, what value am I bringing to my clients, to my customers? And then that translates directly to what I spend my time doing day to day. So knowing I'm a one-man band, I lead all the things here. I'm doing the sales, the operations, the IT, the billing, the collections, all of it. And so that's been very clarifying for me because I really had, well, before I had an academic appreciation that it takes everyone across all those functions to make any business survive, frankly, much less thrive. And now that I'm literally having to do each of those tasks myself, I believe I have a newfound appreciation for once you get into an organization of size, even though there's some folks sitting in some functions that largely exist behind curtains that don't get to see the light of day all that frequently in terms of direct customer interactions. All of these functions are critical. And that's been one of my biggest challenges running my own strategy firm is how do I make sure to keep all of these plates spinning so I can continue to do the work that my clients expect me to do.
So you're totally emotionally immersed in the sense of everything from start to finish. Not only did you appreciate it before, but now you fully feel and understand it.
It's exactly right, and it's easier for me now. And I tried very hard not to, take functions and certainly individual people for granted in a larger business. I've worked Baker Hughes when I was there had on the order of 60,000 employees, right? So there's just more people than you can really wrap your mind around inside of this one business, and so it's easy for people to become numbers in that kind of context. And really distilling it all the way down to what I'm doing here, and each of the businesses I've worked for has kind of been a smaller business than the step before, frankly. It gives me a newfound appreciation that even for those folks, again, that don't feel like they're right there, fighting customer battles on the front lines, it takes everyone trying to get all of these things done in order to keep business operations moving smoothly. And there's stuff that can be very unsexy, like HR work or billing work or some of the IT work that's being done. But all of it's important because any of that stuff doesn't happen, as I see with KSG, I'm then not able to serve clients the way that I expect myself to.
Okay, now if someone were to observe your workday, Jeff, what would they see and what activities fill most of your time throughout the day?
They would see the morning is where I really try to clear as much of my calendar as I can to read and think and create. I do a lot of data gathering, data organizing, data analyzing. So a lot of that activity happens in the morning where I feel freshest, I feel most creative. Also, when I do it in the morning, I feel time bound because I know what the rest of my day is stacking up like. And so there's a little bit of urgency, a little bit of incentive to make sure that I'm, meeting the milestones that I expect of myself in the morning. And then the afternoons is when I do have meetings or other engagements. I try to set those up in the afternoon so that I've had my time to process and to create and to edit. And then in the afternoon, I can start to engage. I can sort of steer my energies and efforts more externally, interact with clients. If I attend networking events or conferences, I try to steer all of that toward a little bit later in the day. But then, again, because I'm a one man band doing all these different functions, as different tasks come up, I'll do some invoicing work or some IT work or other sort of clerical administrative stuff that's required. I'll fit that in from time to time when I have downtime where I feel like, okay, there's not something scheduled for me to do right now, but I do have a little bit of discretionary time, and it's easy for me to pick up those tasks and put them back down as needed.
So, what recent developments have you seen? Obviously, you start your day off as a true academic. I just have to elaborate on that, and that's impressive because that always keeps the brain wanting and more, and that helps you grow. And that's why you get not just knowledge, then you get the wisdom. And I think that's what you're offering a lot of people right now because it's to put that much time and effort into something and then still have time to make yourself grow. I think that's so imperative in today's world. Now, I want to ask you this question here. What recent developments or shift in the energy and marketing analysis space have really stood out for you lately?
There are so many of these developments that stand out. I think the obvious one that my mind goes to, and I'd imagine a lot of people go to, is generative AI. And I've really started to play around with these generative AI tools for a few different reasons. One is that so much of my time is spent gathering, organizing, analyzing data that I want to make sure I'm utilizing these tools as best I can to do some of the bulk processing that would take me a lot more time to do than for one of these tools to do. I'll admit I'm not as far along that pathway as I would like to be, but I continue to sort of explore and experiment in that way. What I have been able to get generative AI to do for me is I am one of these users who probably more than most, my web searching has now shifted to asking questions of the generative AI tools. I play in so many different energy domains, and while I have an awareness and a fluency and bits and pieces of expertise from here and there, depending on where I've spent my time in the past, I am constantly learning about new developments across these energy systems. I also write a newsletter that I have on Substack where it's called Foundations of Energy, and where I write about sort of the energy systems from first principles, where I build up from the ground up, introduce vocabulary and context. And so it requires having a more or less complete, coherent, robust mental model of the world of energy. And so I'm able to probe these generative AI tools, A, to make sure that I understand what I think I understand, B, to ask clarifying questions about the things that I clearly don't understand as well as I need to. And these tools have been a huge plus for me in that way, because while I could get similar information and have in the past gotten similar information through general web searches, I do find that generative AI tools get me more useful answers more quickly, and then I can supplement that where I need to by general web searches. So in a general sense, that's the sort of tool development I've been spending most of my time on. There's other developments just broadly across the data analytical space. I use Excel a lot. I use Google Sheets a lot. I've been playing a little bit with Google Cloud. I've been playing a little bit with Python. So some of these data analysis tools I engage with from time to time. But I would say generative AI the most, and then a little bit of some of these newfangled data analysis tools.
Oh, from an operational standpoint now, Jeff, what recurring challenges or bottlenecks are you currently facing?
The biggest bottleneck for me by far is around gathering and organizing data. So much of my consulting business, what I share data-driven energy posts daily on LinkedIn. That's why I recommend if people want to connect with me, LinkedIn's probably the easiest place to do that. Um, and and I try to make sure what I'm sharing on LinkedIn is almost exclusively data-driven. Something I get a big kick out of is finding a data set, combing through it, analyzing it. It tells me something that I find interesting, and then I share that. I either share it with the world on LinkedIn or I share it with clients, and then I get some engagement, right? And the point is not that, hey, I read this data set, and so now I am offering the one truth about what you can learn from this data set. Different people can look at the same data set and come up with different conclusions. And so I like to be able to offer that with my observations and the insights that I've captured from it, almost as a way to invite people into a conversation to see what they learn and see and what they're experiencing. All of that effort there requires just a near continuous effort toward gathering data, organizing it in a way where it becomes useful, and then actually analyzing it so I can harvest those insights. That is the biggest bottleneck for me, is there is more data that exists in the world than I'll be able to capture, organize, analyze. And so I have sort of an insatiable appetite for tools that will help me ingest more and more of that data.
So, in terms of how the trends, you want to follow trends or keep track of them. How are the trends you're monitoring influencing your current strategy and your business? Are they prompting you to revisit or reshape your growth approach?
The short answer is absolutely yes. I live and work in the world of energy. And there is probably not a sector of the macroeconomy right now that is evolving more rapidly than the energy space. So we have the oil and gas domain, which is where I've spent my career and still supplies an enormous fraction of the world's primary energy. And so that continues to evolve the way it has. There's a cyclical nature to oil and gas that makes it endlessly dynamic. There's very few situations where you find any measure of real stasis in that domain. But then we have these evolving energy systems where we're living in a world where there's a boom in deployment around solar photovoltaic systems and battery energy storage systems. We're also seeing more advocacy and more capital flowing in the direction of nuclear power. In general, we're seeing just a trend toward electrification. And so a lot of debates around how do we supply all this electricity that the world's going to need in countless places around the world and countless sectors across the global economy. And so all of these elements of my work are constantly changing, which is why I rely so much, say, on generative AI to keep abreast of what's happening there. One thing I didn't say about my day-to-day routine, I have this sort of, like you said, this more academic, intellectual pursuit in the morning the more sort of administrative, interpersonal engagement bit in the afternoons. Almost every night before I go to bed, I'm reading, typically books, but sometimes journal articles, and so I try to choose books that are a little more forward-looking, that are more likely to challenge my existing notions of why the world looks the way it does, why it's evolving the way it is. And so reading is another way that I try really hard to challenge myself to, no matter what understanding I have of the world as it exists right now, that understanding, frankly, should be evolving just as quickly as the world is. And so I try to find those prompts and incentives and provocations that encourage me to move in that direction.
Well, let's stay on the positive aspect here. On a positive note, what's working especially well for you or your business right now? And have there been any unexpected wins or initiatives that exceeded expectations?
I would say my time in the morning to think and read and build uh, has been a win for me. I was uh, when I launched my strategy firm, I talked with a lot of entrepreneurs, and that is one big risk of not just entrepreneurship, but as anyone with any measure of professional ambition, is able to say climb the metaphorical corporate ladder, you get exposed to a lot more urgency, and not always does that urgency carry with it importance, and so it becomes harder to figure out the classic two by two of is something urgent or not urgent? Is it important or not important? And try to find a way to segment and allocate your time accordingly. And so I feel like one big win in my business is, for the first year and a half or so of this consulting firm, I have been able to protect and allocate this time toward important challenges that are very rarely urgent for me, but they're important because I know I need to get that work done in order to compound over time. So I would say in the aggregate, that is one win that I'm seeing. In terms of more specific wins, there's a project that I just finished around a forecasting model that I built, looking out into what is the world's use of oil and gas going to look like out to 2030? What are oil and gas prices going to look like that far? What will rig counts look like that far? Typically, when I'm forecasting, I'm not thinking multiple years in advance like that. But this project, this client, sort of motivated me to get more rigorous and longer term in my thinking around these projections. And that was a big win because I was able to test some of the mental models that I have. I was able to test some of the analytical abilities that I have to try to wire together a model that can work, plausibly over the course of a multi-year time frame. And that was a big win for me. So that's something where I try hard to find these kinds of projects that will continue to challenge me, to force me to grow. Because if I get into rinse and repeat mode, I know that I will start to atrophy, and I know that my clients will be able to sense that I'm not doing my best work.
That's how you put it. You can tell when somebody's just going, that's good enough.
That's
You don't
exactly
want to
right.
go there. Yeah, yeah. So let's talk business development for a second, Jeff. What strategy or channels have proven most effective for generating leads recently? I know you're a big advocate for LinkedIn. What else? What else have you been using to generate leads?
So LinkedIn is the big one. That's where I started posting on LinkedIn pretty aggressively back in May of 2022, and have more or less posted almost every single day since. And so I generated a following, right now, a little shy of 17,000 followers on LinkedIn. And so that got big enough where I got some inbound communication that encouraged me to go ahead and launch my own firm. There was going to be, a base of folks that trusted me and the work that I was doing, and I would have some interesting opportunity there. As you suggest, right, that even having some success in generating and developing business through LinkedIn, that's not enough to get me where I want to be. And so as I've continued to evolve in this business, for the year 2025, one of my big resolutions coming into the year was to try to turn some fraction of these connections that I have online into more relationships, right? So even if there are folks that don't live near me, so I can't have an abundance of in-person interactions with them, it is different than having, say, just someone literally following me on LinkedIn versus even the conversation that you and I are having right now, right? To
Right.
have brief video calls with folks where I can properly introduce myself, they can introduce themselves, I can hear a bit more about what they're working on. That is how I go about business development. By no means am I saying this is the preferred way that everybody should go about business development. If I were to fast forward into the future and look back at myself right now and criticize what am I doing relative to my own business development efforts, I believe pretty strongly that one mistake I may be making at the moment is I don't lean hard enough into creating urgency in clients to make a decision to engage me specifically to solve a problem. What I instead do is just my nature. I'm much more curious than I am, say, provocative about trying to create some sense of urgency. And so I indulge my curiosity by asking a bunch of questions when I interact with someone. And I believe what that does is attract curious people back to me. And those wind up being the kinds of clients that I can do my best work with, that it makes sense to connect and collaborate on. And so my business development efforts, in short, are built around trying to cultivate some measure of personal engagement where we can each get a sense of just how curious we are about whatever problems that we happen to be thinking about, and then that will kind of lead into whether it makes sense for us to collaborate or not.
So if you had to point to one area where you're investing the most time and energy to build that momentum, what would it be?
The short answer is I'm reaching out to folks on LinkedIn, sending messages, asking for, or emails, depending on how I'm connecting with folks, asking for my sort of standard request is a 20-minute video call, audio call. If they're here in town, I live in Houston, Texas. If they're here in town, I offer to go for a cup of coffee or maybe a lunch. Um, that 20-minute window seems to be a good window where we can each properly introduce each other and get a sense of what we're each working on, and then decide whether it makes sense to continue engaging or not. And so it's my biggest effort right now is trying to find channels, largely email and LinkedIn, where I can invite folks into these 20-minute conversations. Of course, not all of them turn into engagements after the fact. And in fact, most of them don't. But it's incredibly rare. In fact, I can't think of an example where I had sat down for someone with someone for 20 minutes and then reflected afterward and thought, well, that wasn't worth that time. Because even if it doesn't turn into something useful, I just by the screening process, I'm reaching out to pretty interesting, high
Yes.
caliber folks, and so I learn a lot no matter what we end up talking about.
Oh, absolutely. Now, you touched on this briefly, and I'd like to get a little more to your looking ahead to the next 6 to 12 months. What does success look like to you? What would you be most proud of to celebrate by the end of 2025 and into the first quarter of 2026? Because you
That's a
said
powerful question.
you said you didn't
Um,
like to look more than a year ahead, so I don't want to push you any further.
Yeah, no, it's a powerful question and a very useful question. I would say, my business is set up in two channels. There's the, you know, market research based intelligence bit that I provide. I also do learning and development work where I build and facilitate workshops for either aspiring leaders or existing
Mhm.
leaders in the energy domain that are trying to build their strategy and finance acumen. So I feel like I get a chance to do the traditional consulting bit, but then I get to do some teaching, frankly, which I really enjoy doing. The Substack newsletter, Foundations of Energy, that I mentioned earlier, is part of that learning and development pathway that I've built for myself. And so when you ask about success, in my head, when I think about the performance of KSG, Krimmel Strategy Group, there is the sort of standard consulting framework that I have in my head. But I also have this digital channel that's specifically Substack, but there's a possibility in the future it becomes a podcast. There's a possibility in the future it becomes a video series or a collection of video series. And what I'd imagine when I'm thinking about success 6 months to a year out, I'm really trying hard to grow those digital channels because it's a way for me to interact with more and more people to share what I'm learning across a larger audience base. That audience base also is the group of people. There's a segment of that group is the one that turns into consulting clients in the future. So I'm thinking really hard. It's one of the reasons that I lean so hard into LinkedIn. I'm thinking hard about how to produce high quality output and get that output in front of the kinds of people that when they see it, it makes them ask questions. It challenges
Oh,
them and invites them into a conversation. And so I think about growth in those domains as being an important measure of my success.
okay. And let's imagine, if you will. Okay. Imagine, if you will, if you could instantly remove one major challenge or friction point in your business, what would you choose?
I hate to continue to beat this drum because it gets a little boring, possibly to hear, but it is representative of how deeply I feel about this. My big obstacle is gathering and organizing data at scale. There are so many data sets that exist in the world, And they live in so many different places, and it requires a little bit of unique effort to go capture any one of them. And then I have to ingest that data, and there's a lot of effort around organizing data. Once you even capture it and you have it in your hands, figuratively, to really organize it in a way that you can turn around and use it, takes a lot of effort. So if I got into magic wand territory, which is why there's so many promises of AI, and I guess the one that I'm hoping, in a sense, delivers sort of most powerfully and most immediately, is a tool where I can gather as many different data sets as possible and organize them very quickly, because the value that I'm bringing is really not in those steps necessarily. It's much more in how I analyze data and the questions that I ask around that data, how I use the insights that I harvest from that data to help build up robust mental models that help me make better decisions about the energy world, that help my clients make better decisions about how they allocate resources in that world. So that's the main obstacle I would love to see resolved.
Now, what's the best part of you say you wear many hats. You're the full Monty of your business. What's the best part and what do you enjoy the most about your business?
The part that I enjoy the most is because I am an academic at heart and have the PhD. I love having a job where the bulk of the value that I provide is built around reading, thinking, data analysis. That's the kind of stuff that energizes me to no end. I wake up every morning excited to get a chance to do that. It's largely the stuff I'm reading about before I go to bed at night. So it was a big part of the motivation to launch KSG, was to be able to connect this value proposition that I'm offering the world with a way of working that I enjoy so deeply. And I am just unendingly grateful that I get to spend so much of my time working on those kinds of things that I enjoy so much.
Jeff, this has been a really valuable conversation. I appreciate your openness and all the insights you've shared. Once I wrap this series up, I'll be compiling key takeaways from all of our guests, and I'll be sure to send one your way. Thanks again for joining me today. Wish you continued success. So, and where can everybody find you on LinkedIn? And just give us a brief rundown of where everybody can hook up with you.
Well, first, thank you, Roy, for inviting me to participate here, and for being such a great interviewer. I had a fantastic time having this conversation with you. The easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn. My last name is Krimmel, Jeff Krimmel. That's where I share a data-driven note almost daily there on LinkedIn. So if that's the kind of thing you're interested in, you can find me there. From there, I often share links to, I have a weekly newsletter that goes out. I have my Substack newsletter that's more on the learning and development space. As any new developments emerge, I tend to share that there. So I just steer everyone toward finding me there on LinkedIn. For Krimmel Strategy Group, you can find that on the web at krimmelsg.com.
Perfect. Well, thanks very much again, Jeff. Have yourself a wonderful day.
Thank you, Roy. You too.